Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
So this is, you and I talked about this before we hit the record button for the night. It's actually been like a week or two since
Couple
we've
weeks,
actually
yeah,
since we've done a recording, and
which is total on me both weeks
well,
basically.
no. It's literally I got stuff going on.
Yep.
You finally got bit with the COVID bug.
Yep.
So if you hear Jason mute, you're 7 days post negative or 7 days post positive.
Post positive, yeah.
Post
Of course, you
positive.
won't
So,
hear me mute because by definition that would be an impossibility. But we all know what you mean.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good point. You'll be muting your microphone. How's
Yes.
that?
Yes.
So,
if I have to cough or I just get bored at the conversation, I might be quiet.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, which is pretty much like every phone call we have when I start talking. No, but tonight, when we started this idea of doing interviews, this is a rehash and repeat. We never expected the type of folks that would actually be willing to sit down with us.
Yep.
And tonight is no exception. For those that are Trek fans, for those that follow Trek online, for those that follow Trek podcasts, we've said, you'll hear it even later on, we aren't a Trek podcast.
We're trying not to be a Trek.
Yeah, we're trying not to be. We are our cerebral / RPG / sci-fi / high fantasy / whatever podcast. But you have two severe Trek nerds on it. So anytime that we get a chance to talk with folks that are involved or friends with Trek, we get giddy over it. And this is no exception because this is our first interview back again in a couple of weeks.
It's been a while.
Yeah, everything going on. I don't know what your thoughts were. We started following Laurie Ulster on Twitter.
Yes.
And got caught up with her Little Riker. Yeah, which you'll hear us talk about a little later. We're going to talk with her about it. But she has such a diverse background. She's involved now, obviously, with trekmovie.com.
Yep.
Great site. She does the All Access Star Trek podcast.
Yeah, which is a must listen to if you are interested in Trek and Trek production at all.
I would, and let's be honest, I would hope that most of our listeners, all 5 of you, who listen to us are Trek fans and already have that on your podcast playlist.
Yeah, I mean,
but if you don't,
well, kind of like if we go back a year, kind of like when we spoke with Shelley Manzanoble, right, who we will be having back in the future. We're waiting on purpose with her, but we just assumed everybody was listening to Dragon Talk, just like we assume our listeners are either into or minimally just aware and appreciate D&D, right? Like there are just some things we're taking for granted here. And so if you haven't, you should be listening to Laurie and Tony on the All Access podcast. You should be following her work. I can't explain why Little Riker is so funny, but it finally got to me.
It's the novelty of it. I think it's a icebreaker type of thing. It's different.
Yep.
You and I, we've talked about this when we will talk about anything that would even be considered remotely Trek rumor.
Yep.
Even if it's remotely considered that, we vet it against either official Star Trek .com or Star Trek information or trekmovie.com, because they're not sensationalizing Trek news.
It's legitimate editorial level news and review.
And we don't have a stake in the game in terms of anything. We're just being honest. We don't have sponsors or anything like that. We're just being honest with what we watch and what we use
and what we read. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, absolutely true. But I think it brings to mind just how the landscape has changed over these years And I'm not sure how many years, but how much has changed in terms of where we get our news. I don't mean we, you and me, but where society is getting its news, where it's getting its information. And I don't mean to bring this down. I mean, let's just keep it maybe a little more optimistic or positive, just in how the landscape has changed. I mean, I remember in grad school going to a cafe. I would get I remember sitting at Schwartz's with a cup of coffee and and a pastry and a copy of the Financial Times. And I knew I had a couple hours I could just blow, and I would just sit and I'd relax. Or maybe it was not IMDb. That's where I'm going. I think Investors Business, IBD, Investors Business Daily, right? But now it's different. Now we're talking about, okay, where do we get a lot of news? Well, so like I finally bit the bullet, because I'm cheap, and I pay to have access to the New York Times. Right? I've been reading the Times, I mean, for 20 years. And
if not more. We talked about that in the 90s.
Yeah, right. Well, I hate to. Oh yeah, good point. So at least 20 years. Yeah,
90s,
I was going to say, because I remember that became my homepage back in the day. That the New York Times became my homepage on my browser when I moved to Milwaukee, right after college. And I mentioned that because it was beautiful. They were the only newspaper who had a website that looked good, right? It looked, they got it. They were way ahead graphically and visually. The Times had a website that, well, at least the landing page looked like a paper. And so you could find what you wanted. It was comfortable, it was familiar, very well laid out. Didn't mean there weren't other good news sources out there, but that was it. Even though I get a ton of my news since then from the BBC, still you go to the Times, boom, it looks different, right? But it's still, it's online.
That was the days of when it was a big deal for web companies as to what you made your homepage. So they made the term portal became a big deal. What's your web portal? Like mine was originally Alta Vista, and
I was just gonna say
both as a search engine and as a homepage.
Right.
Then it was Google News. There's all sorts of.
And at this point, we were both flying it at like 9,600 baud. And so we could download
we end
whatever.
Up on this topic. I've totally forgotten.
I'm okay. So I'm drifting us a bit here, but
no, that's okay. I just lost track of how we.
Yeah. So no, that's fair. So because we were
running at 14.4, by the way.
You are correct. We were running at 14.4 by that point.
Global Village Teleport Gold.
Oh my God, modem. Brad.
How do I remember that?
Oh my God, Brad. I don't.
That's a Mac modem for those of you who are
that's a beautiful thing. So how we got here, this is my fault, because in a moment we'll switch over to our just a really enjoyable chat with Laurie Ulster, based largely from trekmovie.com, at least in terms of the stuff that we've been talking about with her primarily. And she's done so very, very much more. But we talked a lot about the site and about the podcast, her podcast and whatnot. I bring this up because I think about whether it's for Trek or D&D or the news, the actual global news. And I think, how do I get my information today? And it's either in a book or one of a few magazines, or it's entirely online, right? Where do I go? I go to my trusted news sources, right? I might go to a handful of blogs, like I absolutely follow trekmovie.com. I put that in my blog folder because I know I can check it throughout the day and look for updates. So I drifted us over here, my friend, but
it's okay. It's that's what I like about the organic nature of our discussion.
Because it's
I literally we talk about this. I still got some COVID
some fog for right,
and I'm like I'm like, all of a sudden, how did we get here? I can't remember.
And wait, is that a dot matrix printer I hear in the background? Right.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, how do we
Smith Corona daisy wheel?
Oh no, Image Writer 2, my friend. Image Writer 2.
Well, that wasn't. Image Writer was that.
Oh yeah.
No. What was the
Yes.
laser one?
We
Laser
we
writer.
never had that. We had the
I had
image
the
writer.
little laser writer.
Yep,
ones.
we had the image
No.
writer next to the 2GS.
Not the laser writer. What were the ink ones?
Image writer. The
Are those
Apple,
image
it was,
writers?
oh yeah.
But those weren't dot matrix.
Oh yeah.
No, but what was the inkjet version?
Oh, I never had one of those.
I did.
Okay.
Now you're gonna hear me
Oh,
typing.
I don't know. You have to look that up. I don't
I
know.
have to-
I
Yeah,
didn't have a
I gotta
printer
look
for a
it up.
few years during college.
I had it's in the I actually have
Yeah.
one in my
Of course you do.
personal computer
Okay,
museum
so
table.
anyways,
But let's
so
move
this
on.
is
Yeah.
this is we've different, but the whole point is to look at where we are in terms of RPGs and RPG adjacent stuff through this middle age lens. And really I'm going to blame Laurie because I mean, in all fairness, she brought up
Style
MTV. Style writer, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry for the interruption, folks.
No,
I
that
had to
feels
do it.
better, right? We
Yeah.
had the image writer, oh man, I can't tell you how many signs we printed out as kids
Oh.
and with my mom with print shop on
Or
the image
newsroom.
writer.
Did you ever use the newsroom on the Apple? Probably not. Boy,
no,
we've really gotten off.
no,
the
but I
path.
did a lot of papers in junior high on Bank Street Writer.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we're drifting here.
Spreadsheeting and multiplan.
Never had
or-
to do that.
Or
No,
VisiCalc.
VisiCalc. Well, but that okay, so we could
Lotus 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's keep.
we
going.
could have an entire discussion on the influence of VisiCalc on the personal computer, but instead, if you're interested, hit us up on Twitter or email, and I can recommend several excellent books, especially especially books like The Troublemakers by Heidi Berlin out of Stanford. Anyways, the point is
not anyone related to you.
Oh, I never thought about that. Not anyone related to me. If she's listening,
Okay.
she's not.
No. Yeah.
But anyways,
but
so,
she might if we tell her we mentioned her.
But we didn't, and we won't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, none shall pass. Okay. Anyways,
Okay.
So yeah, we've drifted a bit here, but because we ended up in our interview taking a bit of a walk down memory lane when Laurie was good enough to share some of her backstory with us. So at this point, before we really do get into VisiCalc, let's hop over to our wonderful little interview with Laurie Ulster, writer, producer, podcaster extraordinaire. Laurie Ulster is a transplanted Canadian who somehow survived a very confusing adolescence as the lone female Star Trek fan in middle school, then fell in love with Manhattan about 10 minutes after her arrival at NYU. After many years as a television producer where networks like MTV had her producing everything from musician interviews and dive bars all over the East Village to game shows in Malaysia, she made the switch to digital, overseeing websites at Fuse and A&E. Now she's a freelance writer who does researched articles, original interviews, personal essays, listicles, event coverage, trending news, and much more. She also still writes and produces for TV and is a contributing writer on several books. Laurie has indeed been a writer, editor, copy editor, and social media strategist for TrekMovie.com since 2016, where she also co-hosts the wonderful All Access Star Trek podcast. It's a passion project, along with popping up as a guest on other Star Trek and sci-fi podcasts. Importantly, Laurie is also a co-founder of Read It All Up, a media company focused on kids' literacy. They are currently collaborating on the creation of an original TV series for kids.
Laurie, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we promise we are going to try to keep this to maybe 3 hours or so.
Right.
So yeah, I'm kidding.
All Trek all the time.
Yeah, there's so much we could talk about, even beyond the stuff you're doing now. So before we get into kind of your background and all that, there are those who listen to us, probably listen to you too, with the All Access Star Trek podcast on TrekMovie.com, right?
I hope so.
Mm-hmm. If you're not, you should be.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. The
So,
news and
we'll
analysis
have that,
is excellent.
and we'll have a link to that in the show notes too.
Absolutely.
So,
Great.
So maybe that's kind of the burning question, right? Like, how did you arrive? Like, what's the story? Because like Brad said, we want to know the backstory, but what's your Trek story, and how did it get you to trekmovie.com and being part of this really neat, really popular podcast and all of these things?
I mean, my Trek story is old because I am the same age as Star Trek. So we were born the same year.
Okay.
But I started watching original series as a kid in syndication and was like insane, obsessed, crazy, reading all the books that told me how it was made, just wanting to know everything. And at that point, it was like dead, right? Like we didn't get the animated series. I grew up in Toronto. And so there was no animated series where I lived. And it was just, to me, it was just like this dead thing that I loved that everyone thought was weird. That was, and then of course, movies. I remember I got my mom's cousin took me out of school to see Star Trek the Motion Picture on the first day, which was amazing.
Yes.
And I told everybody where I was going, but and then everything I've loved, all of it since. Like everything that comes has been so exciting and great. And then I was still like getting up to Trek Movie, I guess, the website, which is that I was still sort of what I call a closeted Star Trek fan. Like my family knew, my friends knew, my husband knew, but like at work, I didn't really talk. It wasn't something that came up a lot. And I was sitting at a job that was really boring and feeling like my career was not going in the right direction. And I was researching for the place I was working. We were doing a piece on Star Trek Beyond. And I just found that every time I needed a story with the right, accurate details and updated information and context, I was on Trek Movie. That was the site.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, I'm a freelance writer. So I emailed them to ask if they needed writers. And Kayla immediately wrote back and said, we don't have money, but we can get you into events. We can get you products that we review. We have, and we can get you interviews if you want to do them. So I very fortunately joined this incredible community of the most fantastic people. Like
that's cool.
Everybody on the team is a wonderful human. Everybody on the team is a huge Star Trek nerd. Everybody is in a different profession and does different things and contributes something different. And Tony, who founded Trek Movie, was the one who suggested that we do a podcast together because he has always wanted to do something with news, regular, especially once we had, all these things up and brewing. And this was after I'd done After Trek and after show, and there were shows up, and Discovery, I guess, had already been on. And then we started talking about what it could be. And at that point, we had not yet met in person, which we didn't until Vegas last year. So we've been recording for quite some time. But it's so much fun. It's a ton of work. It's really, really fun and rewarding. And we love doing it. And I mean, he has to edit, so he has the bulk of the hard work on it for sure. But it's a blast. We love it. And we've become such good friends.
It comes across in the dialogue, which is cool. But that's really interesting to hear that history, because you wouldn't think that these two people you're listening to every week really didn't know each other up until that long ago.
Well, during when the pandemic hit, something Trek Movie started doing was Sunday night Zooms, and we would all pick a Star Trek episode and just put it on. Everybody would cue it, 3, 2, 1, boom, and we would watch it together on Zoom, and we got to know each other that way. And I'd met some of them in different locations, and Tony and I talked on the phone and stuff. But yeah, it was definitely when we met in person, it was almost anticlimactic because it was we already.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
I'll say
positive side effects of a very negative situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seriously. I will say, just to reiterate something we were discussing before we went on air for this chat, is that we think the news and analysis you two provide on the podcast, it's just second to none. The news is really helpful, but the analysis, it's so insightful. And every once in a while, I've learned to really listen to what the two of you are hypothesizing might be happening. And every once in a while, Tony will say something, and it's like, that's fascinating. I don't know how he got there.
He has a very unique insight into the history of Star Trek, the path that it's charting, and the business too.
Okay.
Like it's funny, like I've worked in TV, but never on the, programming, decision-making, business side of things. But he just has this, I mean, he knows a lot of people and he hears a lot and he hears a lot off the record. So things he can't say, but and he's really smart about those things. And then I like to combine that with a little like poking of him from time to time, just to jostle him. But I'm always really interested in his point of view, and we do think very differently about things, so it helps sometimes that we'll approach something from completely different places.
Okay, so I have to ask before we switch gears, like to talk about all the other interesting things you're doing.
As you could tell, Jason's like giddy talking about this.
Well, I mean, it's we joke on the podcast that we're not really a Star Trek podcast, but we're not even trying not to be right now. But I got to ask this because it's so peculiar and fun. So I'll poke at you for a sec. What's the deal? What's your deal with Commander Riker?
Oh, with Little Riker.
With Little Riker.
Yeah. Little Riker. Yeah. So we were in Vegas, and Vegas last year was my first big Star Trek event. Like I'd been to one in my 20s that was like some books and a couple of people on stage. But this was like the first time I got to go to the big one. And I was just giddy running around. And the dealer's room, they have a few of those talking action figures. And I had a talking Picard years ago. I took it all over Europe and I photographed it like all over France and Spain and whatever, and lost it. Like I think someone took it off a desk of mine somewhere, so it's gone. So I saw the talking Riker, and they were all very expensive. And then there was one for $15. So I bought it, and then Tony took me to the store to buy batteries, and we did this whole thing because I thought it's going to be dead, and it worked, and it made me so stupidly happy all the time that we all just started going nuts, photographing him all over. Like Kayla and I were like laughing so hard with Joe from Trek Movie, and we're doing the hand sanitizer thing, and we're screaming with laughter, like it was so ridiculous. And then when I got back to New York, I was like, well, there's no reason to stop posting Little Riker pictures. So I would take him places in New York. My kids just roll their eyes every time I pull him out in public and I do something. My kids get so mad and frustrated, and my husband just rolls his eyes. But we'll help. Like, we'll help a little. And I went to Toronto. My sister-in-law's an artist, and then she would disappear with him for like an hour. And then I would look in my phone, all these photos would start coming in, and she would be doing insane things with him and tiny little props. So he's just been, and then in Vegas, he got to pose with actual Star Trek. Like we got Nicole DeBoer, and Jane Brooke and Anthony Rapp and Noah, of course, who's such a good spirit.
Hilarious.
And Mary Chieffo. So my goal is for Little Riker and Big Riker to that's my big ambition. I mean, I worked with Jonathan Frakes a couple times, but he certainly wouldn't be like, I know you. Hi, bring your Little Riker over. So I have to figure out how to make that happen.
Right. In fact, that
we got to help. We got to help on our end with the Twitterverse. Just start to retweet Little Riker stuff.
Well, I don't want to like scare him too much. So it's like, it really is, doesn't have to be a scary thing, but just a picture of the two of them together.
You can retire and call it a day.
I'd be so happy.
Yeah. I will say when I started seeing you post, so everybody, if you're not following Laurie on Twitter just for Little Riker, you really should be. I'm kind of being serious here because I saw some of the early ones and I'm like, what is the deal with I mean, now I say this as someone, full disclosure, who regularly forgets that we've had a Picard action figure in my living room for maybe now the better part of a decade. I don't remember who gave it to me. And then when the girls were little, my girls were little, someone just said it's like stood it somewhere by a plant. And we just forgot. And so he's like made his way around our plants and I can't tell you where he is. I can just tell you, I think he's in the living room. It's just we don't notice anymore. But at a certain point on your Twitter feed, I found myself, I had shifted from seriously, what's the deal to I was starting to laugh because of the things he was doing. And I'm like, okay, now I'm in now. I've given up. Yeah.
He gets around. Look, he got to sit on Stephen Colbert's desk. That was a really big moment for me.
Wow.
I mean, I think, Jason, when you and I first saw that, I think we thought, well, we can't steal the thunder anymore, but I think we need a little mascot for the show.
Yeah, I think everybody should have a little mascot. I mean, it's something I used to do, like I said, with my Picard action figure. I certainly didn't invent it. Tons of people do it, but it just became this thing that got so silly. And sometimes I'm just sitting in my office working and I just get up and make a little Riker scenario and then photograph it, and then
3 hours later it's the end of the workday.
It's just
little
so stupid.
Riker replaces George Clooney as the Nespresso spokesman.
Inevitably someone walks in and goes, "What are you doing?"
Nothing.
So
Okay. So on that note though, we could obviously all talk Trek all evening easily, but you've done a ton of different stuff. I mean, just to refresh ourselves, Brad and I were just flipping through your website beforehand just to kind of reacquaint. You have written and or produced, I mean, just all over the place. You've done some really interesting things.
I've had a couple of careers at the same that weave in and out of each other. And I've definitely gotten to, I mean, for me, the dream job of a lifetime that I don't see how I'll ever repeat the glory of, was After Trek. Like when you take decades of loving Star Trek and then a couple of decades of working in TV.
Yeah.
And then getting hired to do an official Star Trek after show for the first show back after, a lot of years. That was, I mean, I thought it would be the greatest job ever. And it was the greatest job ever.
And that was a good show.
It was so much fun to do. And everyone on it was a phenomenal A+ human being. Like, it was great.
Wow.
How did you end up? So, you had mentioned you're a transplant, I air quote, from Canada to New York, obviously went to school there. How did that transition into you working, as a producer and a writer?
Just TV in general.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, no one at NYU ever said, by the way, you should move to LA, which actually would have been helpful career-wise. I'm sure now they are saying to people, they're giving people like practical. I was majored in dramatic writing. No one ever said, if you want to write for TV, you should go to Los Angeles. Yeah. Anyway, so here I was in New York. But I started, it's like my first job out of school was through a former internship, and it was a PA job. And I loved production. I was like, you can go to work, but you're still playing. And even when you're working really hard, it's not corporate. It's fun. There's a whole team. And as a PA, you get to work in every department. So you get to actually learn how a whole bunch of different things, you learn to avoid, if I volunteer for this job, then I won't have to do that job. Mm-hmm. And people see me as someone who volunteers, which really, if to anyone who ever wants to start out as a production assistant, be eager to do stuff and everybody will be happy to have you around. So I just worked my way up through production and had the writing put aside. And then I'll do the fast version. Then I had kids.
Either way.
And I was like, I can't work these hours and be the mom that I personally would like to be. And I was very fortunate. Someone who believed in me and wanted me to work at the same company moved me into digital at the beginning, the dawn of soon all the networks would have websites. It was really before people, it was like ABC had the coolest website back then because they had a video portal. It's really cool, which you couldn't afford. So that allowed me to, so then I've eventually moving all these parts around for a couple of years, I realized I've been a writer my whole life. I'm not writing. And I found a way to do that. Every time I was unsatisfied with my career, I would take up a bunch of side projects until I found where I wanted to go. And then I luckily got pulled back into TV and got to do some cool projects there. But then I've always been writing and pitching and writing. And I've gotten to it. And I've now got a couple of books that are going to have my name on them, which is exciting. And I just feel like it's lucky for me that I still get to do new things, and I still have a lot of new things that I want to do.
Can you say any more about those books?
Well, I'm co-writer on the official companion guide to Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is coming out. They just delayed it, but it's coming out next year.
Okay.
And then there are a couple out, there's a book called I'm looking at my shelf to see it. Oh, What to Watch When, 1,000 TV shows for every mood and moment. I was a collaborate, one of the writers on that. There's another one I can't talk about, but it's a fun practical book based on an IP, like a manga,
Mhm.
but I can't say what
Okay.
it is until they
Neat.
Okay.
that. And then a teen parenting thing, because I got teens and stuff.
Any secrets you want to share?
Just go there. I write about teens a lot to my kids. They're cool about it, and I
Yeah.
don't put their names in or my name
Yeah,
if
of
there's
course.
an issue, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff with my name that's fine, and they're fine with. So
That's really
If I
sweet.
could, I'm always the one that tends to do hard lefts or hard right turns when we
Go
do
for it.
interviews. But just talking about teens and everything like that, you also are co-founder of Read It All Up.
yes. So this is my friend, my brilliant, the person who helped me get a career in digital from, when I left to have kids and came,
Yeah.
she's the one who pulled me back in. Brilliant woman. And she started this, she started Read It All Up as a program in schools to get kids interested in reading through a taste experience. And we picked out all these books that had food in them and would provide the food for kids so that they would get much more interested in the reading experience.
Interesting. Yeah.
Which, is discouraged. A lot of kids are told, like, don't eat near, in the library or whatever. But I was never told that.
No.
Whatever. Anyway, so she's been working very diligently on that. I worked with her on that for a while, and she's pursued it. And then with another friend who I call Myth, but her name is Leanne, but I call her Myth. We joined up, and we've been actually working on creating a kids show that has to do with reading, and we're just about to get our final pitch materials together.
Wow.
We've been working on it for a really, really long time. And so I can't really say anything about it.
Right.
And nobody might care. I mean, if nobody ever buys it, then nobody ever buys it, but it is something that's, really dear to all of our hearts. We work really hard on it. We're just almost at the point of putting together our final
That's
materials.
really
But it has
cool.
to do with kids and reading and ways of getting kids interested in reading who aren't interested.
Yes. That's really cool. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I do. When I saw that was something I thought was important we mentioned, just because especially these days, and I have 2 teenagers too, it's just they don't soak books up like we did.
No.
And we were born just a little bit after Trek, but all of us are from the book generation. Go to a library or buy books at Walden Books or whatever the case might be, Barnes and Noble. Now a lot of it's digital and online, and I'm not knocking it. It's a multi-visual environment. But when my daughter would go and buy a book to take on a trip, I was happy about it. So having kids, and getting that into their DNA and into their own personal ecosystem, I think is important.
It's hard. And it's, when I grew up, like, we had a room full of books and nobody ever said, go read those books. I just went in and I read every book, and I went to my school library and I read every book, like everything. And so I have always wanted to live in a house with tons of bookshelves. And now I have this whole office full of books, and that almost nobody but me ever is interested in. So, I mean, my oldest reads, but has pretty different taste. My youngest reads a little bit, but not so much. But I mean, I hope, I'm glad I'm not an audiobook aficionado, but my husband is, and so many people are, and it's the same experience. Like, it's just as magical and wonderful. And I think reading is all about empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and actually you see through the eyes. Like, it's not, you see a story, but you're actually seeing through different people's eyes. And that, to me, is the most important element of reading. And so you get that with an audiobook as well.
Well, and I think, I mean, not to get even more geeky, but I think the research supports that reading fiction can promote empathy. I mean, we know this happens, especially in kids.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important. And think about all the stuff you read as a kid that you remember forever. Like that, a lot of that just never leaves you.
Sci-fi and nonfiction, but I remember a lot of books. Yeah.
Jason's you're a little bit one-tracked when it comes to reading. So
or whatever, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this is very true. Although I did recently
I'm
willingly,
razzing.
but it's true. I mean, we've been friends
Yeah.
for 30 years, but it's
Yeah.
true. I mean, it's I did read some fantasy lately and was really surprised at how good it was. But in all fairness, it was an R.A. Salvatore, and so I kind of dipped into the good stuff, you know. Yeah,
To the D&D world.
to the D&D world. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. When
Yeah.
you again, I'm the person that comes out with all these questions and there's no flow to them or anything like that. When you were doing more of your producing and all that, and again,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to narrow it down. What about that? And you kind of alluded to it a little bit, so maybe I'm just asking for a little drill down. What about it really kind of drew you to? Was it, like you said, was it, you kind of mentioned it was still like you felt like you were playing?
Yes. I mean, even when we were working, you're playing. Well, it's very collaborative, which is like the opposite of what I do now, where I'm sitting in my house, copy editing a lot, but and writing, which is a very solitary thing. But there are groups of people, and of course, when you, especially when you start out, it's a bunch of people in your age group too, which is fun. And then eventually start meeting people from all different age groups. There's so much to learn. I always loved TV and celebrities, and I worked at MTV and did game shows. Like, that was so much fun. Even when it was stressful and crazy and you'd get promoted, you'd have more responsibility, more headaches, you'd have to worry about everything. And still, there was so much fun to be had. And you could work with people that you genuinely liked you wanted to hang out with anyway.
Yeah.
And then you'd get to whether you were like working on something where you got to interview someone, or a fun game show, or you're off doing shoots in the fields, like whatever it is, it's a lot of fun. It's way better than other jobs that I can think of.
Yeah.
Like and I was never a corporate person. And when I was working in digital, that was very corporate. And as I moved up that ladder, I realized this is not the place for me. This is I want to work in content and not distribution. And so I managed to find my way back eventually.
So go ahead, Brad. Sorry, because
I was just gonna say I have to ask. I'm a first generation MTVer. So what were you involved in?
Yes.
Well, my big show was Lip Service. If you ever watched Lip Service, which is so funny because the host was John Ailes, who ended up being on Star Trek Picard. Right?
Oh wow.
He played Bruce Maddox on Star Trek Picard.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
But so he was our host for 3 out of 4 seasons.
Jeez.
He was great to work with, actually. And I found him on Twitter right after Picard. I was like, John, oh my God. But Lip Service was my big one. And I worked like in development. Like, here's a funny one. You'll like this little weird, not braggy story.
Yeah.
I had to screen the first episode of season 2 Real World with the cast of season 1 Real World. Like, take them into a conference room.
Yeah,
I took them into a conference room and I was like, here's season 2 and I'll show it to you. And then I showed it to them. So that's probably like a little historical moment.
Yeah. So I don't know why this came up, but just in the past weeks, I don't know where I saw something about MTV, but something came up and I found myself, right, because my daughters are, at least for a few more months, well, 1 and a few respectively, they're still 14 and 16. And so I, in a moment one evening, found myself explaining to one or both of them, what's MTV?
Yeah, well, its time has come and gone, really.
Yeah, I was never a watcher. Like, I remember, like Brad said, we're first gen for MTV. That we were on the young end of their initial audience. But like I remember whatever it was. I think toward the end of elementary school, like I forced myself one Sunday morning at home to watch MTV for an entire day. I don't even know if I ever said that to you, Brad, because everybody did it. And I didn't get it. I didn't see the allure, right? Like, I listened to music. And And besides, what's a music video anyways? I mean, it's, and so I did
It's
it.
funny how you were probably 12, but you sound like 75 right now.
I was probably 10, but I sound 75 right now.
Yeah.
And I did it. And so, and I was like, okay, so I got my fill on that. But of course, you heard about the news, you knew who the people were. Like, this is early days. So I'm sitting with one or both of my girls, and they're like, what's MTV? And, honestly, I was completely stumped. I had no idea how to explain this iconic piece of my generation's history, because they just were, I didn't even know where to start. It's like, well, let me tell you about how the world was in the before times. I just didn't even know how to. I'm like, it was a thing when I was a kid. That was like it was a total father failure.
Yeah, well, first of all, I also didn't watch or get MTV. Like, I wasn't into it when I got hired to work there. So that was the funny part, was I was utterly clueless about everything. But
Funny.
I recently was talking to my kids about someone, it was actually right after Nichelle Nichols died.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, I have a photo, I have an autographed picture of her, but I didn't get it myself. One of the VJs at Fuse, where I worked, got it for me. And they both said, what's a VJ?
Right.
And I said, oh, a video jockey, like a disc jockey, but with videos. And they said, there was a place where people did that? And I was like, yes, there were quite a few. And they employed me for quite some time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no MTV street cred in my house.
No. Well, again, it's a generational thing. It's
yeah.
I was, Jace, we were, Real World came out right at the time that it would have been prime for us, because they were all
it was
adults. So I was hooked, and then my wife was hooked when we got together, and then we kind of, early part of 2000s is when it was out. But season 1 I remember very well, even season 2. So that's actually cool. And then I had to peek. Yeah, Jay Moore did lip service as well. I remember.
Yes, he was not so pleasant to work with.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, he was. I have no trouble saying that. He was just not pleasant to work with. He was quite full of himself and not fun. And then John came along, and John made it his own and got playful and did fun things. And I mean, it's so funny when you watch a game show, the host of a game show, once the camera's on and the game starts, the host is in charge of everything. Like, you can have producers and directors and voices and people telling you what to do, but once it's going, and because game shows, if there are prizes there, you have to play it out. Like, you can't stop and start. The host controls everything. And I always thought John did an amazing job of that.
Oh, that's
and then he popped up in Picard, and
that's so cool.
Yeah, and then after I saw him in Picard, I realized how many other shows he'd been in that I hadn't noticed it was him, because he's changed he doesn't look the same, and and it's been a long time, but he was on Better Things, which I love that show, and did not realize that he was on that.
Wow. So to be mindful of your time, Laurie, and to come full circle again, so I'll pull a Brad here, going back to the All Access podcast, right? Because that's how like we first became exposed to you and your work, because we were hearing you. I mean, I'm listening to you and Tony every week. I'm wondering if what you're comfortable saying on air, as it were. I know we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but lately, and so by the time this episode drops, so when I say lately, like kind of the past couple months, I mean, you guys have been having some really cool high-level interviews with producers, showrunners. I mean, I don't know how you guys are doing it, but you're pulling in the true creators of today's Trek.
That's who we really wanted to. I mean, it's always so much fun to have the actors on.
Yeah.
I will never not be thrilled to have an actor on, but it is we really wanted showrunners, and we knew there was a gap with, what just ended? I'm like, hello, Strange New Worlds ending and Lower Decks starting. And Tony has great relationships with all these people because he's dealing with them all the time. And so first we got Aaron Walke and Prodigy. I'm deeply, deeply in love with Prodigy. It's been a huge inspiration to me as I'm working on the show that I'm trying to develop. But it's also, I just think it's everything that Star Trek is, and it's surprising and wondrous. And then, so that was really great. And Aaron was incredible. And every time we were worried about time, he'd be like, oh, I'm good. So that was good. And then we just, this is fine to talk about, we just spoke to Terry Matalas, showrunner of Star Trek Picard season 3. And he gave us so much time, answered so many questions, so much insights. We could have kept going. In fact, I think we ended up continuing the conversation after we stopped recording. And then the only reason it ended is he got cut off, like technology cut him off.
Oh, wow.
And otherwise we'd still be talking right now. So, and that was days ago, but he was fantastic. So people can look forward to that. I think we're going to break it up into two.
Yeah.
When I say we, I mean Tony. Anthony
Royal
Pascal will
we.
be the one doing the work of breaking it up into two,
Yeah.
so that we can still do news and our bits that we do at the end and those things. And then,
Yeah.
But I think I think there's new information about season 3 that people don't know that they'll be happy to hear. And I think when you hear his genuine enthusiasm for what he's been doing, whatever you thought of the first 2 seasons, don't worry about it. I feel like this, I feel like this is going to be very different and something we all have wanted.
Okay, so you don't have to answer this, but I do have a follow-up question to that in terms of your impression of some of these shows. Because like on your podcast, when we listen, like, I mean, you're excited about everything in the best way. I mean, yeah, right. But I'm curious. I mean, you made clear what you think in terms of Prodigy, and I have to agree that really surprised me.
Right.
Yeah,
I thought it was a kid's show. I'll probably just watch it and be amused by it.
But by the end of the season or half season or however they're doing it, it's like I'm all into the story. And like you said, they are using it to build Trek from the ground up, and it's just beautiful. It's more than an homage; it's a lesson, right, in how to Trek. But I'm curious what you think about Picard and Strange New Worlds so far.
Picard has been I mean, we've been, I think, pretty honest about Picard on the podcast. I found season 2 incredibly disappointing. So season 1 was like a mixed bag, some interesting ideas, some that didn't work. I like the idea of exploring who he is. There was some stuff mixed in there, and then it just started to not quite gel. The end didn't come together. And then season 2 started so strong and so great. And then I just thought, and we said a lot on the podcast, like time after time after time, loose threads just falling and being left, and things that didn't really connect, and big stories that at the end you're like, I still don't understand why you had to do this to do that. And like small things in the middle always to appreciate, like, oh, this moment is really good, and the scene is very good, and the acting is always very good, and whatever it is. And I love certain characters, but it was just a big disappointment. And I felt like, frankly, the big idea they were trying to do never came together for me. It just didn't. I didn't buy it. It didn't. It didn't connect, and it didn't make sense. The plot didn't go with that for me at all.
How about Strange New Worlds?
But Strange New Worlds, and I just, for the record, Picard, I'm so excited for season 3. Like I'm
like unhealthily so.
Open heart, ready. Let's do it. Only worried that it might be too. I'm not even worried anymore. Anything I was worried about, I'm not worried about. Strange New Worlds, I think, fantastic characters, great setting. I think when they are at their best, they don't rely on, let's bring up this character from the original series. Let's bring up this thing from the original series. I'm really, everyone who knows me and Star Trek knows I'm very mad about the Gorn. I'm very unhappy with the Gorn.
just the fact that they're using it like they are.
Well, here's what it is. First of all, I never thought Arena was a great episode in terms of the directing and the writing are not good in Arena. Frankly, it's not a well done episode.
Right.
The premise is terrific.
Yep.
And the premise is this alien that looks ugly and terrifying to you, that you think is so different, that you think is your enemy, that if you try to understand your enemy, it is possible to end hostility, or at least have a starting point.
Right.
And the whole point was, I mean, yes, like they send this distress call to lure them in and kill them. Like the Gorn did that. That was really bad after wiping out a colony. But it does become this thing of, wow, now I'm seeing things through your eyes. And that beautiful moment where Kirk goes, oh, you could see it that way. And right away, Spock and McCoy are on that bridge and they're like, yeah, you know what? If they did, we could be seen as invaders, and instantly because they're Starfleet and who they are,
Mhm.
nerd. But that's why they're able to make that switch so quickly. They don't need
Yeah.
tons of convincing. They're immediately open to that. So when you take that, so there are two things about the Gorn. One, you now take that enemy and you make them just vicious and cruel to the point they're not doing those things because they think someone invaded them. You don't grab humans and keep a colony of them and put your eggs in them and kill them off one by one. You know, they're cruel, vicious beasts, which is a kind of poops all over Arena, frankly. And B, to me, the kind of sci-fi I like is not monsters, because monsters to me are not super interesting because there's no nuance. Like I know everyone loves Alien and those movies. To me, there's little bits of interesting things with characters, but an alien that's just physically trying to kill people is not my thing. So right. And so I feel like that's what they've done with the Gorn, is that they've taken away the thing that was important about them, and they've just turned them into killer monsters that are particularly, you know, vicious, and somehow we know they fly spaceships and must give orders and stuff. So, you know, if they moved into that really quickly, I might be more open, but I feel like the prevailing thought was the Gorn are cool. I liked the Gorn when I was a kid. I'm gonna make the Gorn in the show. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I love the show. I'm enjoying so much of it. I think the characters are great. The interactions between them are great. Some of the stories have been wonderful.
Yeah.
And the risk, I do appreciate the risk taking, whether it pays off or not. But I want to be like, stay out of, you don't need these things from the other show. You could just move forward.
Yeah.
You have all the ingredients to move forward into very original territory. You have the writers, the directors, and the actors already, all talented. Production designers, like you can't, you know,
God,
believe. Costumes make it. You have every ingredient. So just do something. I want strange and new worlds, please.
Do you think that that they feel like they need to pay homage just for those of us who are longtime Trek fans? There's a feeling that we need to see that. I'm with you. I think fresh and different and new is the way to go. And I think it attracts a different audience too.
Right.
They don't feel like they have to know.
It's a great entry point. That show, if you've never watched Star Trek, that would be a great one to watch. It's fun, and they have most of the principles, and you know, they've got it down. So I don't, you know, look, there are fans who love that stuff. So it's not for me to say like it's wrong, don't do that, when there are a ton of people out there who, if you threw a tribble in there, well, I'd be complaining, they'd be thrilled. So, you know, like
so
what,
true.
Who am I to say that? But I think that it's just a certain creative who's, everyone's thing that they love about Star Trek is different. And I think someone's thing that they love about Star Trek isn't the same thing that I love about it. But fortunately,
totally
there's enough crossover that we still have these great, unique characters. And obviously, because the shows are being made now, they are progressive in a great, new, and wonderful way. And I like that. I like that different approach, and playing with, being very playful with people's roles and things like that.
So agree.
Before I go, I think you're absolutely right. No, but there's no right or wrong answer.
Right.
To it. You know, I loved the DS9 episode when they went back to.
Me too.
That was a
Trials
special
and
episode.
No, that's great. It's one episode, and they didn't actually recreate it. They actually just went. They literally went back into it. So.
But
that's a love letter.
Exactly.
I loved that, especially when Cisco at the end did the little Kirk communication, and he's like, "Yeah, I might have bent the rule a little bit."
No, and you know what? Like, I liked seeing Mud on Discovery. Like, I thought that was actually great. Like, so it's, and I actually on Discovery, I love what they've done with, say, Amanda. I mean, she hasn't been on for a couple seasons, but I and obviously can't be on. I'm hoping she'll turn up on Strange New Worlds. But like, talk about taking a character like that and giving her so much more. You know, that's so there are ways to do it that are really good and to make connections. I was never mad about Michael being Spock's sister. I'm like, all right, sure. So I'll try it. I'm open to that. So
Yeah.
it just depends on what it is, but it's when it feels to me like it's relying on it, especially I sometimes think at the expense of the characters they have. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very nervous about the Kirk thing in Strange
I
New
was
Worlds.
going to bring that. I've decided to put my full faith and credit in the writers of Strange New Worlds. It's a little risky. I don't know. You're not helping.
Sorry.
It's been so beautifully written, that whole first season. And like, if it's like he's in 3 or 4 episodes of the quote unquote arc, I could see how they can do this, tie it to canon. I'm truly concerned that they're going to take a beautiful thing and it's going to become the Pike Kirk show, at which point it's not Strange New World. It's not. Anson Mount is doing, I never thought anyone would come close to Picard for me and come close to Patrick Stewart as Picard for me, but he immediately after that season became a close second. Like this is someone worthy of that captain's chair, and to not keep focusing on that, I think, would be a real loss.
Yeah, and I think the rest of the group, already, like, number one's been missing. She's constantly just being shuttled off.
Yeah.
And we don't get to see her very much.
Yeah.
And I know everyone is excited about what they get to do. They're all giving interviews saying they're excited about doing new stuff. But again, I want to say, like, I don't need to pring necessarily. I'd be happy if we didn't go down that road. But I'm definitely, there's no majority. I think everybody feels differently about it. And so I can only say what my opinion is and what I think of it. But some of the episodes have been great. And the main thing is, like, when you sit back and watch it, is it enjoyable? And God, yes. Like, it really, really is.
Thank you so much for spending so much time with us this evening. We really appreciate it. We've really been looking forward to our chat with you.
It's so nice of you guys to invite me on. Like, it's so flattering and kind. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. And our thanks to Tony as well. Please keep up with All Access, because God, is that a fun podcast. I don't know what, like, the highest compliment I can give is my immersion in Trek, my Trekdom, that important piece of my life, which kind of like you, the Trek adjacent stuff has become like an actual professional piece lately, but your podcast has become like a significant minority of that experience right now, because I know I go from week to week with, okay, what's the analysis and what's that going to make me think about and reconsider, whether it's the franchise, whether it's the stories, whether it's the characters, and also remembering to be critical of it along the way.
But hopefully in a fun way. Like, we try not to just rip anything apart. And it's all, Trek movie is where we're obviously the stories are either being churned out by Anthony or by us and all the different people on the team. And that's also such a labor. Like, if you want to keep up with Star Trek stuff, I just sound like I'm doing a plug, but I'm just going to do it.
Please.
Like, go to that site, because we don't come up with stupid rumor things. We source things. We check to make sure that this is actually the thing that's true before we put it up there. We also theorize, contextualize, analyze. We love doing the speculation articles, like, oh, they said we're going to see someone from this show, and then we just try to guess at who it could be and have fun. And I've gotten to do so many huge interviews because of that site, like being able to talk to Gates McFadden and Kate Mulgrew and Nana Visitor blew my mind when we talked about her book, and
so looking forward to that.
All those, well, it was on here, wasn't it on Hero Collector? It was through there.
I didn't know that.
Yes, her book was, I believe, through them.
That sucks a little.
I think she's got to shop it around now, actually.
Okay.
But because she'd done so much work for it, and it was she's such an incredible person. But all those interviews that we've gotten to do have been amazing. There are too many to even list. So that's been you can always find interviews. Anthony's doing interviews all the time, and great, like, review. If you want to know if something's worth buying, like, we have reviews, we have everything. So that's really where the podcast comes from. Is that.
Thank you for bringing that up, because we haven't talked much at all about the website, but but it is the de facto stop. I mean, before I encountered trekmovie.com, I was reading a bunch of a bunch of the other sites, and there are some pretty good sites out there, but
Yeah, there are some good ones.
But then you get to trekmovie.com and like it's legitimate news. There's a
Yes.
different editorial level, and none of the other ones have it. I eventually just deleted all the other bookmarks because it's like, this is good. This is you know it's been vetted, you know it's been thought through. And like you said, when it's conjecture, you guys say, look, here's what we think. Right. And we'll say, and when you're wrong, you hold yourselves accountable to it.
Well, there's sensational material out there. I know, on your phone or whatever, you can get feeds, and feeds will pop up and throw rumors out there, rumors about films, rumors about series. And again, I'm not trying to show for anyone, but it's where I go to see if it's legitimate or not. If it hasn't been written about yet, then at most it's an iffy thing, and I'll put it on the back burner and see if it shows up. Because you're not necessarily going to throw material out there for the sake of throwing material out there, which is what a lot of people want to get that going, and a lot of people like that. For me, I'd much rather stick to what I know is coming, or what's, like you said, reviews of books and things like that. So, I don't know how many times, Jason, you and I have used it when we've prepped for even podcasts, or he and I sit on the phone and not talk for Trek for hours, and we'll actually reference it while we're on.
Oh, that's great.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like I mean, a case in point in terms of what you're saying, Laurie. I think, like, before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about, it's maybe not a leak, like LeVar Burton's slip, if you will, recently. And it's like I saw, somehow got into the Twitter feed. Must have been, I don't know, Facebook, I don't know. But I saw a quote unquote news article from one of the other Trek sites out there. And, I mean, it was what it was. And it was maybe hours later that Trek movie had their take on it, but no hyperbole, so clearly sourced, like, okay, here's what was actually said, right? Here was the context, here was the place. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Well, it's like, here's the big one, was the recent Shatner comment that happened at Comic-Con, and like the Hollywood Reporter misrepresented what he said, and then everybody ran with their interpretation. And you have to context these things. Like, he was standing, I wasn't there, but Anthony was there. And he was joking around. He was joking like, I'm gonna die on stage. He was making jokes like that. And so it was like he did half an answer to something, got distracted, was making jokes, and then it turned into, he thinks that all the new shows are bad. And in the meantime, he's like posing with Paul Wesley, taking pictures with him. And look, William Shatner says great things and terrible things. He sometimes says really bad things. He often says eloquent, beautiful. I'm a huge fan. So, he has his bad moments and his good. But something like that where everybody just ran with it. And I feel like one thing we try to do is like, let's slow down. Instead of rushing, let's find out. Let's get the whole story and try to context it. And, I tease Anthony sometimes about over contexting, where I'm like, no, everybody knows there's a show called Star Trek. Like, you don't have to say that in there. But he's very smart about making sure that he's painting the proper picture of when this thing was said and why it was said and what it was in response to. Because when Alex Kurtzman gives a piece of information, how he chooses to give it is very telling.
That's right.
Right? How did he deliver that? Was it answering a question? Was it clearly an item he wanted to talk about? Was it something he tried not to talk about? So I think that's part of it too. And I look, there are other sites that are also doing a good job, but like every kind of website there is now about everything, politics, entertainment, books, doesn't matter. It's all about a clicky headline, and they don't care what happens once you get there. So they just need that click, and then you get there and 500 ads cover up all the stuff that you're reading, and you're like, okay, this is not a good.
No, trekmovie.com, everybody should be reading it. It's just so solid. Laurie, thank you so much. This was a real pleasure.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Such a cool discussion. Laurie, thanks again for coming and chatting with us, and not just about Trek, but your experiences working in television, everything like that. And again, folks, trekmovie.com, all access Trek podcast. If you're a Trek fan, you already are listening and using. If you are not,
get with it.
Got to do it. So heading over to the GM corner. So it's been a couple of weeks, like I said at the beginning, since you and I have,
since we've geeked out about this stuff.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'll go second, because some of my stuff has been outside the realm of RPGs. But what have you been up to? Obviously you've been recovering from being a bit under the weather and doing some traveling and
what's on my desk, as it were. Honestly, one of the things, and I'm going to keep this brief, but one of the things that's been on my mind, and it comes to mind again because Laurie brought it up regarding the Now Visitor's book. So now by the time this episode drops, perhaps there will be more news. I know I just saw an update from one of the people from Hero Collector, from Eagle Moss, today on Twitter, explaining a little more. But as many of our listeners probably know, Eagle Moss, the company who makes all the Hero Collector stuff, but why I care is because they have been attempting for several years now to document in book form every starship in all of Star Trek canon. As of the moment, again, unless something has slipped under the radar between this recording and the episode dropping, they are currently, it seems, defunct. Hopefully there will be some saving of the company, of their IP. Why I bring this up is because like I had just sent you not too long ago.
I was going to bring it up during. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Okay.
Yes.
So Eagle Moss has these two beautiful volumes of starships. Of the entire chronology of Trek, I have the two Starfleet starship volumes. After I want to say after Picard season 1, actually after quite a bit of Discovery, Picard, and even Lower Decks, they updated their second volume of Starfleet ships. And so I have it, and I was going through the bookshelf because I'll have to post some updated shelf porn to the Twitter feed before too long. But I raised a shelf. I made some changes so that I can accommodate in December Fred Almond's upcoming How to Defend Your Lair. We'll be talking about that. Don't you worry, everybody. Hopefully have him back. But I've been a little concerned because I really want the starships through Picard season 3 next year. And so because now again, by the time you've heard this, Terry Metalis has shared some more things courtesy of Laurie and Tony on the All Access podcast. But it's been a constant tease for the past couple of months from him on social media of all the ships we're going to see and the space docks and so on. And I want all of that in a hard copy so I can peruse and put it on my shelf. And I don't know if we're going to get it. So that's a little selfish, but that's what's actually kind of been on my mind for the GM corner, of just wondering, in 2 to 3 years, will there still be one more Eagle Moss Starfleet volume or an update? Because their work is just incredible.
I would hope someone would pick it up, and I would suspect someone will.
I suspect
you still have the same folks who,
mm-hmm.
independent of the business itself, the creators and the writers and all that are still probably willing to put it together. And you're the one that turned me on to that material. Yeah. And you've had it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't resonate with me until we started doing the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I played a lot of Star Trek Online, where they had all the different ships, non-canon, but still the choice of playing all these different ships. So pretty cool. Me,
what's on the desk?
From an RPG perspective, I have been, again, I feel like I'm just repeating myself all the time.
Are we talking about One Ring?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah,
I have
keep
been,
going. Keep
yeah,
going.
no. Well, no, because you are the one that you mentioned it to me, but I had already purchased and printed out the Strider module that
Oh,
allows you to play
yeah.
in effect solo
I'm still really curious about that.
with the One Ring. So that is on my. We've had some stuff going on, just traditional busyness
Yep.
the past couple days, because you and I both knew June this summer was going to be crazy. I had one graduate high school, one going to college, and then kids with jobs and
We
all
both
sorts of
had
other stuff.
atypically busy summers.
Yeah, these are very atypically busy.
Yeah.
But the One Ring with the Strider module, and
Yeah.
then literally, I can't see, this tells you this is where the fog comes in. I don't know if I talked about this, you might remember. I actually have it in my hand. But the Burning Wheel anthology, which came out.
Yep.
And
So curious.
Yeah, and it's burningwheel.com. It's notes from Luke Crane and all that about changes and all that they want to make. So literally on my desk, Jason can see this, is my
well, you've been sending
set.
me, and I've been loving it. You've been sending me desk porn next to your work setup, like what made the short list. Yeah. And if people could see it, you really should post it, because to give you insight into to give our listeners insight into our mindset around RPGs in real life, you have such a menagerie of unrelated game books now. It's really cool.
Yeah, I have so I'll post a picture. I have the rules digest for Modifius Star Trek Adventures, along with the player and game master guides. Then I have the player's handbook and DM guide and DM screen for D&D 5.
See, there
and then I have all of my random table and resource guides from like Tim Woods,
Jeff Ashworth. Yep.
And some other ones that from Matt Davids that we haven't talked about.
No.
So I have that, and then I also have the Burning Wheel, and I have Torchbearer, because those are the ones that are on our mind. And you and I actually, just because like we said, everything's been so busy. I don't know if I texted you last night or the night before when we were just doing some brief texting, and I'm like, we have got to game again. And I think we're kind of settling on this idea that we have our D&D stuff, but it might kickstart us if we do something Star Trek.
Yeah. I think we should end it there.
Yeah.
Because this is, I have a feeling this is going to work its way into we need to talk a bunch offline. And I think this is going to work its way probably into a number of upcoming GM corners, because there are other things we've been talking about doing as well.
Goodness. See, this is where the fog comes in.
Well, because we haven't done anything with it since I did the very preliminary setup. But that's why I say I think it's gonna be a fun fall, everybody. Expect that.
Ironically, it's when things will potentially quiet down for us.
I was just saying to my wife the other day it's a little counterintuitive, but I'm looking forward to being back in the office at the university, because because with me being there, I can regulate my time. And it's like I go in, I come home, and I'm at a point in my career now where when I'm home, I'm not going to do much. It's just going to be family time and time for other projects. And over the summer, it's harder because there's no schedule. For me, it's harder. There's no schedule.
And there are things that we want to do that would allow us to be creative, but put us in front of the computer for a little bit.
Yep.
So we'll talk about those. I'll leave you with two things. I'll leave you with two things. One, because you posted it and I forgot to respond back. I did get my copy of Mazda Stories in the mail, and that has been on my desk.
Yeah.
As Mazda owners, we get a little magazine where they advertise their vehicles.
I put my copy in the reading room just earlier today.
Mine's on my chair. And then I always considered, I still do even years later, consider fall kind of a start of a year for me. fall felt like
Always.
start of the year
Mhm.
because of school.
Yep,
Even when
that's
I
right.
wasn't in school, I
It's
had
just
you and
organic.
others who were,
Yep.
and every fall, last night was nice and cool,
Mm-hmm.
and it reminded me of going to the bookstore,
Oh yeah.
Audubon Court Books,
Yep. Oral
and
Hunt.
you would get desert sage tea,
Yep.
I would get ginger peach tea.
Yep.
It would be cool out, and then we would sit like you were talking about with Schwartz and talk about Trek. This is pre-web, folks. Treks,
Oh yeah.
Wars,
Yeah.
faith, politics, anything
Yeah.
that wasn't, I mean, and we obviously had our moments where it was sophomore.
Though those discussions well, let me put it this way. This podcast and everything we do for and around it is very directly a long delayed result
That's what I
of
was
those.
getting at.
Yep. Of
I
very
look
directly.
forward to the fall when we are going to do these,
Yes.
when the air is cool.
And you
and
got your pumpkin spice on the desk.
Yes,
and
I
I've got
do.
my coffee. I'm with you, my friend. I am with you.
Yep.
Mhm. All right, everybody. Since it's still August and fall's not here yet, we're going to bid you all farewell. As always, be well, stay well. We will see you next week.